All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Alex. I'm a gameplay designer and programmer at Frictional Games. I'm going to talk today about how I moved from being a solo developer into working with a big team. Briefly explaining what the talk is about is basically how I went from working on this kind of pretty terrible things towards having a more polished vision of like games and releasing my own very personal autobiographical game on Steam, and eventually how I transitioned to Frictional Games, who's known for making psychological horror games, kind of like Amnesia and Soma. There was supposed to be sound, but my laptop doesn't want to collaborate, so that's fine. Just pretend that there are a lot of scary sounds right now. Ooh, bang. But yeah, this was the short teaser for Soma. Is coming out 1st of December, which is in like 2 days on Xbox. And now we have a new safe mode. Basically, if you're not into horror game, now you can finally enjoy Soma as well. Okay, so I think that the foundation of being able to move easily in the game industry is to be some form of multidisciplinary designer. This means that even though you know that you want to be a game designer, you need to complement your own knowledge with a bunch of other things on the side. Basically, this can also be seen from the lens of like being a curious person and just overall thinking like, okay, I really want to be into game design, but like, how do all these other things help me becoming a better game designer? So in this talk, I will just go through my personal story from the beginning, from day zero, when I was born, to basically today. That's not true. Okay, so when I started, I was living back in Italy. And in Italy, there was no game industry whatsoever. I had like 1 or 2 major AAA companies, no bachelor game dev program existing, and there was no cultural understanding of what games were. So my idea was like, okay, if I cannot make games, then I will write about games. So I started from game journalism. Out of passion and love for games, I started a blog. It grew pretty fast. I started coordinating a small team of people, and I had to reach out to publishers and PR to get all the cool free games. And then I could review a lot of games and study them and find what was good and what was bad about them. And I could also travel across Europe, which was pretty neat. So this foundation gave me a bunch of skills in terms of like management and community management, but also some basic programming skills, because I had to work with web development, asset creation, and overall, I think in general, like there was a big component of interaction with other people, so social skills. Of course, also analyzing games gave me, I think, what was like a strong design starting point. I thought, yeah, I still kind of want to be a game designer, so I'm going to spend the nights at a friend's place making terrible prototypes. And that's basically what we did all nights. And I had this focus on game design, but like I knew that if I wanted to have a complete prototype, I had to take care of like every aspect of the game. This means that I started developing like coding to study from books, coding theory, implement code, making and composing some music, and doing basic art. And all of it was like absolutely terrible, but it was a starting point to be able to be autonomous and do things my own way. At the time, there were no game events in Italy whatsoever, so the only way to get feedback and give feedback was through like TigSource and all these forums where you could have online interactions with other game developers. Then I moved to my beloved country, the Netherlands. Here, of course, obviously, I developed a lot of hard skills in terms of game design and production. But in the spare time, even in that case, I never really thought like, okay, I'm just really going to focus on my school courses. I studied some art, 3D graphics, some music. I did some photography. I tried to kind of broaden my horizon a lot. And also living in the Netherlands, there were a lot of bureaucratical stuff to take care of all of a sudden. But there were luckily a lot of nice game events, which was completely new to me. And at the time I was like 20, 21. I was in the, let's say, privileged position of being able to say, okay, I actually want to go to San Francisco for GDC. And that happened not because I had anything to showcase or I didn't want to talk to any publisher or whatever. I didn't really have any excuse to go there. I was just curious. I was like, how does game dev life work? How can I meet new people? And again, these are all things that are not strictly related to game design, but that allowed me to form my knowledge about how game development works from many different perspectives. And here to the right, you can see a nice memory from Indie Meetup 0. That was a good old memories. So a big part of it, of moving to the Netherlands, was to growing a network of people. And I think that these days we have a somewhat misconception of how to do networking. I think that a lot of people just think, okay, I'm going to go to this game event, so I'm going to print like 6 million business cards and give them to strangers, and that's it. And I think big point of real networking is to find people that you share interests with, keep in touch with them, ask for help, and ask if help is needed, and act as a bridge between maybe two developers. You can introduce them to each other. I think that's absolutely fundamental for every game developer. Joining game jams and competitions, of course, was helping putting multidisciplinarity in place, because all of a sudden I would act as a joker figure in a team. Like I could do mostly game design, but if there are assets that are needed, I can do them, music, coding. That really paid off really well. With my team at the game jam in the UK, I won an internship at Guerrilla Cambridge. So again, I moved to a different country for a short time. And for the first time, I started using in-house tools, which was totally new for me, and I learned basically AAA practices. How do things work in AAA? I wanted to be indie, but like it's so exciting to know how things work in big studios. So for the first time, I was following Lead's directions. I was using, as I said, in-house tools. And like, for instance, just to go into being curious, like, I think that if I just had to focus on game design, I would have just explored, like, you know, the game design document. But I was like, well, screw that. I'm going to check the budget of this project. So I would go into internal documentation to check, like, budgeting, or also, like, documents for pitching to possible partners. And this was all not because I wanted to be a better game designer, but I just wanted to know how things worked in the industry. And of course, this also allowed me to extend my network. And I was, by the end of it, I was definitely not convinced. It was super cool. I have really good friends there, but I felt like I could not really connect with my work. So I was like, okay, what do? I guess I will start a company because I'm curious. How does it work to start a company? So here, luckily in the Netherlands, it's super easy to start a company. It's also pretty cheap. So like, I just out of curiosity, I was like, okay, let's start a company, I guess. So I had to take care of like a lot of bureaucratic stuff, doing taxes all of a sudden. And basically now I could officially work for clients, which was really nice. So, of course, I could work for hire. I learned how to do invoicing, how to do tax return. This is all knowledge that adds up to your background. That has nothing to do with being a good game designer, but it enriches your figure as a game developer overall. In the meantime, I would also like keep studying. By the time, to give you an idea, I think most of my solo projects were done in GameMaker and GameMaker Studio. But that didn't mean that I would stop to that. Like I would take books and study C# and C++, just because you know, like maybe one day I can work with something like that. And for me, that was super important to develop this sense of like being engine agnostic. Like I don't really care what engine I'm using. I want to be able to move across engines really fast. Then I eventually moved to Scandinavia. Again, a new country, but the fact that I did good networking beforehand, like, allowed me to move in a new country and already have a network of people that I knew and that I could trust and I could be part of in terms of like the indie scene. I needed a new internship. I failed tons of interviews. Eventually, I found a team that was like a pretty like messy experience. It was small and inexperienced, but they were doing AR games for kids, and I was like, holy shit, this is crazy. I've never done anything like that. And again, even in this case, it was a bunch of new elements that I exposed myself to learn just for the sake of learning new things. And again, after that project, I never really did any AR stuff ever, but who knows, maybe in 10 years I will have some expertise that I just got out of curiosity. I was at some point craving for some more personal touch into games. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna make an autobiographical games. I work solo, design, code, art, and sound, and overall game direction. And yeah, I felt like, okay, this is a pretty safe environment. I don't really care so much about this thing at this moment. I will just try and contact the press. And the game got picked up by Killscreen and other websites that liked the game, which was like an early prototype. So I submit the game to the IGF and it didn't go through, and I felt pretty bummed out. So this taught me about how to deal with failure and to having to maybe push forward to convince people that maybe some ideas have some potential. And I built a press database. I learned how to keep in touch with press, how to do these interactions. And the fact that beforehand I was a journalist also allowed me to know, like, okay, what does a journalist want to hear? What is super freaking boring to read in a press kit? And also, like, I managed to finish a game project, even though that ended up not being the case, because I felt like, okay, I want to actually release it on Steam, but the game is not ready. For that, I will have to redo art, music, redesign a bunch of things, and do more coding. But I had like all this earlier experience that I exposed myself to that allowed me to make step after step go towards a better result. And it took extra time to make. I ended up making it much more personal than it originally was. I recomposed the music, and again, all of this was because, like, I had the experience of like knowing how a tool for making music works because I did it when I was like in my room in Italy making some random shit. And I made like a good game trailer, and I submit to IGF, and this time I got an honorable mention for the Nuovo Award. And basically this taught me about like how do I take care of, like, how do I look at the macroscopic picture of a game? How do I do art direction and overall game direction? Submitting to Steam, Humble, and GOG, like, how does it work? What are the interfaces and how do they operate behind the scenes? All of these skills, again, none of what I'm mentioning is really like strictly connected to game design. I mean, there's definitely is a lot of game design making in the process of making the game, but all these surrounding elements are just like things that add up to the knowledge that you're building and that you want to build for yourself as a game designer. I felt like I just wanted to learn more, so I basically decided, okay, now I want to be back into a team. So I did a bunch of job tests. I went to GDC again for the third time. I found partners for funding a solo project that I was just thinking of making. And eventually, Frictional Game offered me the job after I did the job test, and I decided to take the job. So Frictional Games is a bit of like unusual, beautiful place because it's basically a middle team size. We are like between, it used to be like 3 people, now it's like 15 to 20 people. And we have a slightly vertical structure, but we have like a lot of creative control, each one of us. And we have tons of responsibility. We are divided in task forces, so we work mostly like in pairs. So it's like one designer / programmer with an artist. So it feels like very indie and strictly like you have a lot of control, but you're part of a bigger machine working all together. And they don't have a pure game designer position, as I'm a gameplay designer and programmer. How the interview worked is that I did have a lot of interview experience with all the failed interviews that I had before, so that was great because I knew I had some experience. How can I be better at this? They asked me if I had basic C++ knowledge, and this is not something that somebody that studies design and production get to do, but like because I was curious and I wanted to be better, I did study some C++, so I could say, yes, I actually did this, this, and that. AI experience, I had some super basic AI stuff in my games, but it was something, you know, that I could show because I decided that it was interesting to play around with AI. And something as stupid as like doing the frictional work test, they paid for the test because it was like 3 days full time. And I knew how to invoice a client because I had this previous background. So that also added a message of like, okay, this is maybe a person that knows what they're talking about. And the work test was like, okay, yeah, make a mod for Soma. I was like, holy shit, like, what are you saying? So I had 3 days to come up with a mod for their game. And I didn't know their programming language that they were using, AngelScript, but the fact that I was always interested in switching with development environment allowed me to easily pick up and go through the wiki and the documentation. I needed to use in-house tools, and the fact that I exposed myself into going to game jams and landing that internship allowed me to be able to move with new tools. Logging my work, I checked how people that are fancy log their work, so I could deliver something professional. And yeah, I could show autonomy and to prove my design skills, which was the most important thing, of course. So the way of getting hired, I think, and transitioning to a bigger environment is to basically trying to be a game designer plus, which means, again, like focusing on game design, but making sure that you don't lose track of all the elements that are surrounding game design and that can give you different perspectives and allow you to look at things from different in different ways. And yeah, so this is basically the point of being a multidisciplinary game developer, and specifically in my case, a designer. And basically this can be seen being curious, like when we focus on being good at one thing, we lose our chance to expand our skill set beyond what is expected from us, because there's a lot of like good game designer, and there are like millions of better game designers than me, but then if you improve your skills beyond that, you can show that you can add more to the team because of that. And you should not lose track of like doing things for fun and for the sake of doing things, because when we focus on like being like, I'm going to be a game designer, so I'm going to spend 100% of my time designing stuff, you lose the chance of having fun developing extra knowledge. And that's it. Thank you.